Louisiana history, the shadowed origins of a mysterious land. Long before European flags were ever planted in its soil, the land we now call Louisiana was home to civilizations shrouded in mystery. Thousands of years ago, indigenous peoples walked these forests, fished these waters, and built elaborate cultures that have since vanished into the mists of time. Hidden deep in Louisiana's terrain lie the ancient remnants of these civilizations, like the enigmatic earthworks at Poverty Point, a monument to the prehistoric woodland culture, and the Marksville site, a haunting testament to the Mississippian peoples. These early inhabitants lived in scattered hunting and gathering camps along the uplands and coastal prairies. Yet, in the fertile low-lying floodplains, called the bottoms, farming villages thrived. At the dawn of European contact, historians estimate the indigenous population to have been around 15,000. But by the late 20th century, that number had tragically dwindled to only a fraction. Still, echoes of their presence whisper through the state. In its place names, its waterways, and its forgotten trails. Then came the Europeans. The first known outsider to set foot in present-day Louisiana was Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto in 1541. But it was the French who would carve out their legacy in the shadowy frontier. In 1702, Pierre Le Moyne d'Iberville and his brother Jean-Baptiste Le Moyne de Bienville fought against brutal conditions to build permanent settlements. Their most ambitious creation came in 1718, New Orleans, a city that would soon become the heart of colonial intrigue, wealth, and war. By 1731, Louisiana had transitioned from the failed hands of business magnates like Antoine Crozet and John Law into a French crown colony. Its population swelled, from a few hundred to nearly 8,000, many of whom were enslaved people forced to labor in the sweltering fields. New settlers included waves of German immigrants who planted roots just upriver from New Orleans, forming what became known as the German coast. But Louisiana's destiny would not remain French. In 1762, in a secretive backroom treaty, France ceded the territory to Spain. For almost 40 years, the region became a Spanish possession, even as it retained its French soul. In 1779, Spanish forces took Baton Rouge from the British and seized all of West Florida, tightening their grip on the Gulf Coast. And then, in a dramatic turn of power, Spain quietly returned Louisiana to France in 1800. Just 3 years later, history shifted once more. In a monumental move led by President Thomas Jefferson, the United States purchased Louisiana from Napoleon Bonaparte in 1803. Known as the Louisiana Purchase, this transaction would more than double the size of the young nation, extending from the Mississippi River to the rugged Rocky Mountains. Louisiana's story is not just one of land. It is a tale of vanished nations, colonial ambition, secret treaties, and empires rising and falling. And beneath it all, the soul of Louisiana remains, complex, conflicted, and endlessly captivating. Louisiana history, a state forged in rebellion and river trade. As the 19th century dawned, Louisiana stood at crossroads of ambition and unrest. The vast territory was divided in two: the territory of Orleans, encompassing an area that mirrors present-day Louisiana, and the sprawling territory of Louisiana, stretching across the heart of the continent, where the waters of the Mississippi and Missouri carved ancient paths through uncharted lands. By 1810, whispers of statehood began to stir. The territory of Orleans had swelled to a population of 77,000. But becoming a state meant more than just numbers. It meant uniting fractured loyalties and conflicting identities. One such fracture was found in the Florida parishes, a region east of the Mississippi where rebellion had briefly sparked the independent Republic of West Florida. These defiant settlers had overthrown Spanish rule, raising a lone star flag above a fleeting republic. Their lands and their legacy were absorbed into Louisiana's destiny. On April 30th, 1812, Louisiana entered the Union as the 18th state, but peace would not last long. Within 2 years, a final chapter of forgotten war would be written in Louisiana soil. Between December 1814 and January 1815, the world turned its gaze to New Orleans, where U.S. troops under General Andrew Jackson clashed with the British in the last major engagement of the War of 1812. Against all odds, Jackson's ragtag army, including free black soldiers, frontiersmen, and pirates, defeated one of the most powerful military forces on Earth. It was a decisive moment, and yet curiously irrelevant. The peace treaty had been signed weeks before the battle began. Still, the Battle of New Orleans became legend, cementing Louisiana's place in the nation's mythos. In the aftermath, the state became a magnet for settlers and dreamers. Migrants from the eastern United States poured into the fertile lands surrounding New Orleans, while newcomers from Germany, Ireland, and the West Indies flooded into the city's bustling docks. As the heart of the Mississippi River Valley pulsed with life, New Orleans transformed into the economic engine of the western frontier. Massive loads of grain, cotton, and livestock flowed downriver aboard steamboats. In return, merchants in New Orleans sent upriver an endless stream of European goods, fine textiles, and exotic wares, turning the Crescent City into a gleaming jewel of trade, culture, and conflict. But beneath the surface of prosperity, tensions simmered. Wealth was uneven, power concentrated, and Louisiana's story, still young, was already veined with complexity. Louisiana history, slavery, secession, and the shadows of war. As the 19th century unfolded, Louisiana's soil yielded more than just crops. It fueled an economic empire. The state became a cornerstone of the Southern plantation system. Its wealth built atop the backs of enslaved Africans. In the humid lowlands and fertile plains, vast fields of cotton and sugarcane stretched toward the horizon. These were no ordinary farms. They were heavily capitalized operations, relying on the forced labor of men, women, and children held in bondage. A powerful plantation elite rose from this system, wealthy, politically dominant, and determined to preserve their way of life. Yet far from the riverbanks and grand estates, a different Louisiana was forming. In the northwestern hills, small farmers carved out lives of independence and grew increasingly resentful of the planter class's grip on state politics. Tensions between these factions played out in legislatures and local governments, but more often than not, the planters prevailed. By 1860, as talk of secession echoed across the South, Louisiana found itself torn between loyalty and rebellion. Many Louisianans were hesitant, aware of the dangers, unsure of the future. But in 1861, the state cast its lot with Confederacy, joining as one of the original 7 breakaway states. The die was cast. The illusion of Confederate permanence shattered quickly. On May 1st, 1862, Union forces under General Benjamin F. Butler entered New Orleans, seizing the most important city in the South with little resistance. Butler's rule over the occupied city was swift and uncompromising. When defiance arose, he responded ruthlessly, ordering the hanging of at least one vocal dissenter to send a chilling message. Union control would not be questioned. Even as cannons thundered across battlefields elsewhere, President Abraham Lincoln began laying the groundwork for a new Louisiana, one loyal to the Union, reconstructed from within. But the path forward was steep and perilous. Among the most divisive questions, should African Americans be granted the right to vote in this emerging reconstructed state? Lincoln, in one of his last acts before his assassination, gave his approval. Still, despite these efforts, Louisiana would not officially rejoin the Union until the war's bitter end. The end of slavery did not mean the end of struggle. In the chaotic years that followed the war, ex-Confederates regained control of the state government, passing laws and enforcing policies designed to suppress the rights and freedoms of newly emancipated black citizens. Their dominance signaled that while the war was over, the fight for justice was just beginning. But in 1867, the tide began to shift again. With the arrival of congressional reconstruction, federal authorities imposed direct oversight over southern states. In Louisiana, this marked the beginning of a radical transformation. A new constitution, written under U.S. guidance, granted full political rights to African Americans for the first time. And in 1868, after years of occupation, rebellion, and fragile peace, Louisiana was readmitted to the Union. Yet beneath the surface of this progress, old resentments festered. The ghosts of slavery, war, and lost power would not be easily buried. Louisiana history, terror, suppression, and the fight for power. In the aftermath of Reconstruction, Louisiana descended into a political battleground. The fault lines were clear. Republicans, bolstered by newly enfranchised African Americans and headquartered in New Orleans, stood against the former Confederates, who dominated the rural parishes. But this was no ordinary political rivalry. It was a conflict laced with violence, intimidation, and the echoes of war. Between 1868 and 1876, Louisiana witnessed a campaign of organized terror. Former Confederates, unwilling to accept the new political order, turned to shadowy militias and white supremacist groups to regain power. The Ku Klux Klan, White Camellia, and White League emerged, not as isolated outlaws, but as orchestrated forces of chaos. Their mission was chillingly clear: dismantle Republican influence by any means necessary and reassert white dominance. Republican candidates were murdered, elected officials threatened or lynched, and entire black communities terrorized into silence. The only barrier between democracy and disorder was a U.S. Army, which stationed troops across the state to protect polling places, legislators, and voters. For a time, the balance held. But in 1877, everything changed. As part of a political compromise to resolve the contested presidential election of 1876, federal troops were quietly withdrawn from Louisiana. The retreat marked the end of Reconstruction and the beginning of a dark new era. Without federal protection, Republican resistance collapsed, and white Democrats seized control of state politics. What followed was not just a political shift. It was the institutionalization of racial oppression. In 1898, a new state constitution was ratified, crafted with surgical precision to disenfranchise nearly all black citizens. Literacy tests, poll taxes, and absurd registration requirements gutted African American political power. And in the wake of this legal suppression came segregation, a system of Jim Crow laws that enforced racial division in every corner of public life. Meanwhile, Louisiana's economy returned to familiar patterns. The plantation system, once shattered by war, was revived in a new form. Cotton still ruled, but now it was worked not by enslaved people, but by the landless poor, both black and white. Unable to buy land, thousands were trapped in sharecropping or tenancy, forced to farm land they did not own in exchange for a share of the crop, often rigged by landlords and merchants. Yet, as despair settled in, resistance flickered. In the 1880s and 1890s, a wave of agrarian unrest surged through Louisiana. Small farmers, crushed by debt and controlled by merchant plantation elites, rose in protest. The People's Party, also known as the Populists, rallied white and black farmers alike in a rare, fragile alliance. They challenged the dominance of the planter-merchant lawyer class, offering a vision of economic justice and political reform. But by the early 20th century, that flame was extinguished. The elite, armed with money, influence, and systemic control, crushed the reform movement. Conservative rule tightened its grip, and Louisiana's power structure was restored, unchanged in its hierarchy, but cloaked in new laws and new justifications. In the shadows of democracy, the machinery of oppression was alive and well. Louisiana history, oil power in the shadows of the modern age. As the 20th century unfolded, Louisiana's history entered a new era, one still tethered to its past, yet propelled by the engines of modern industry. The vast forests of the state drew the attention of powerful corporations. By the late 1800s, timber had become a towering economic force, feeding a lumber boom that lasted for decades. But it was what lay beneath the earth, oil and gas, that would truly transform the state. The discovery of oil reserves and natural gas fields ignited industrial growth, bringing with it both prosperity and exploitation. Extraction fueled the rise of factories and ports, but Louisiana's conservative political elite, loyal to old power structures, refused to impose meaningful taxes on these lucrative industries. This created an economic paradox. Great wealth flowed to the state, yet little of it reached the people. Into this storm stepped a man whose name would haunt Louisiana's halls of power for generations, Huey P. Long. Rising to power in the late 1920s, Long channeled rural frustration and working-class discontent into a populist rebellion. Elected governor, then U.S. senator, he built a ruthless political machine, one that touched every corner of Louisiana's public life. His reign was absolute, his methods controversial, but his impact undeniable. Long used his power to transform the state. Roads, hospitals, schools, and bridges appeared where none had existed before. Welfare benefits expanded. Education reached the poor. And while his tactics were often brutal, his popularity surged, especially among those long ignored by the ruling class. After Long's assassination in 1935, his political vision lived on through his allies, particularly his brother Earl K. Long, who carried the torch into the 1940s and 1950s. As war erupted overseas, Louisiana entered a new economic chapter. World War II ushered in rapid industrial development, especially in the petrochemical sector. Along the Gulf of Mexico, offshore oil and gas drilling became central to the state's economy. As energy production soared, so did personal income, and by the post-war years, Louisiana stood at the heart of America's fossil fuel boom. But not all Louisianans shared in this prosperity. In the 1930s and 1940s, a well-educated black middle class in New Orleans began challenging the deep foundations of segregation. Their battle took place in courtrooms, where legal arguments chipped away at the system's facade. By the 1960s, Louisiana's African-American communities were rising with the national tide of the civil rights movement, confronting injustice with unshakable resolve. Change came, slowly, painfully, but it came. Voting rights, school desegregation, and public accommodations became battlegrounds for a new generation, and by the end of the 20th century, Louisiana politics began to open. But true to its past, the state never lost its flair for drama. The once dominant Democratic Party faced stiff competition from a rising Republican movement, ushering in a new era of political rivalry. But controversy remained ever present. David Duke, a former Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, was elected to the state legislature in 1989, a chilling reminder of the state's turbulent racial history. Meanwhile, the other side of the aisle offered its own intrigue. Edwin W. Edwards, a four-time Democratic governor, left a legacy of progressive reform, but also scandal. Accused of corruption for years, he was eventually convicted in 2000 on charges of racketeering, fraud, and extortion, casting a long shadow over his otherwise bold political career. Through boom and bust, scandal and progress, Louisiana history remains a tale unlike any other, where the past never truly disappears, and the present is always shaped by ghosts just beneath the surface. Louisiana history, collapse, recovery, and the unfinished future. By the 1970s, the momentum Louisiana had built through oil and industry began to falter. A state once enriched by natural resources found itself at the mercy of boom and bust cycles, its economy tethered too tightly to the volatile tides of the oil industry. While other southern states pivoted into manufacturing, technology, and dynamic service sectors, Louisiana lagged behind. Its failure to diversify left it vulnerable, exposed to every tremor in global energy markets. And then came the storm. In August 2005, Hurricane Katrina struck Louisiana with a force no levee could contain. Southern Louisiana, particularly New Orleans, was devastated. Entire neighborhoods vanished beneath the floodwaters. Infrastructure collapsed. Lives were upended. Businesses closed. And for a moment, the state's future seemed drowned in silence. But from the ruins, something stirred. With support from the federal government, local leaders, and countless volunteers and organizations, Louisiana began to rebuild. Homes were raised, roads repaired, schools reopened, and amid the sorrow, a spark of renewal ignited. The state launched initiatives to revive tourism, drawing visitors back to music, cuisine, and haunted beauty in New Orleans, a city that refused to be forgotten. Yet, just as recovery took root, disaster returned. In April 2010, a deep-water oil rig, located roughly 50 miles off the Louisiana coast, erupted in flames. The explosion and the subsequent collapse of the rig unleashed one of the worst environmental disasters in American history. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Crude oil spread relentlessly across the Gulf of Mexico, poisoning waters, blackening beaches, and threatening the survival of Louisiana's fishing industry and fragile ecosystems. Wildlife perished. Coastal livelihoods were shattered. And once again, Louisiana found itself in a familiar position, on the front line of catastrophe, caught between natural beauty and human exploitation. Today, the story of Louisiana remains unfinished. A state forged by fire, flood, rebellion, and resilience, still wrestling with its past while reaching toward the future. If you found this journey through Louisiana's mysterious and complex history compelling, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to History Love. We uncover the hidden truths behind empires, battles, and forgotten legacies, one story at a time. Let us know in the comments which part of Louisiana's history surprised you the most. And tap the bell so you never miss another untold chapter from the past. Thanks for watching and stay curious, history lover.